Awesome. Well, really excited to have you here.
Yeah, and I'm excited to be here, and I have already the right t-shirt.
Yeah. Hackathon shirt. Nice. Very cool. Scotland. Yeah. Yeah.
Haven't been
So,
there physically, but good that you send these also by mail. So for anybody listening and who's liking these shirts, even if you attend digital, you get some.
one of these days, right? Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What part of the world are you in right now?
Uh, where I'm most of the time in Germany,
Got it.
in
Awesome.
Dortmund. Yeah.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so I'm really excited to have Nabil here with me. Nabil's been doing a lot of work on contributing to ZIO HTTP, and I feel like it's been kind of part of the ZIO community for a long time. But yeah, it's first time kind
Yeah.
of having him on here, and I think first time, yeah, kind of not just being like a friendly, smart voice on the on the Discord or the GitHub. So yeah, it's really cool to do this,
I
and part of this is
I
going to meet
I
people.
I guess if one would go through the Symposium videos, there might be also some audio contributing of me somewhere. But yeah, I guess
There you go.
the face might be the first time.
There you go. Well, that's awesome. Well, yeah, we're really excited to have you. And maybe
Yeah,
do you want to start talking, just like introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can kind of dive into
yeah,
ZOHTTP
sure.
and some of the work you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'm Nabil. I'm as I mentioned before, living in Germany, and I'm working for Rewe. That's a big grocery retailer here in Germany. In fact, one of the biggest, and probably even one of the biggest in Europe. And yeah, working for the online shop. Um, I'm now at Rewe for about 4 years and doing Scala for almost 10. But like professionally, it's I think 7 about. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, and at some point I found this nice library called ZIO and then got involved with the community and first booked some workshops from John and then later joined the Spartan program. If you are, really liking to go deep into the rabbit hole of functional programming and ZIO, that's what you should take a look at. Patreon, John the Ghost.
He was not paid for that endorsement.
No. I just enjoy it. There's a lot of nice and fun people, and a lot of people that I guess out of this program started to build some ZIO libraries or contributing to other ZIO libraries, and yeah, I think it's always nice, and I had with a lot of people there nice discussions, including Adam, and
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a great grip.
that's good. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, now recently I also became I guess you can call it a maintainer for ZIO HTTP because now I can review and accept pull requests. That's very nice.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so yeah, I think ZIO HTTP is like a great library and I like contributing and there's a lot of new and cool features. Yeah, and one of these new and cool features is the endpoint API. I guess, which we will be talking about today, and especially the feature of generating OpenAPI, uh, yeah, documentation from out of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. If you could say, do you get to use ZIO as part of your job as well, or is it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it
yeah,
just kind of
yeah.
something
So,
outside of that?
um, actually, my company is giving the individual teams a lot of autonomy. There is some limits, nothing is without limit, of course, right? If you would like to program in brainfuck, they would definitely say no. But yeah, like so the big JVM languages, right? Like Java, Kotlin, Scala, no problem. JavaScript, TypeScript, stuff like this. We have a lot of services, and it's up to the teams to decide what they want to do. And my team is doing Scala wherever possible, and yeah. since we have autonomy, all the new stuff we are writing in ZIO, and also we will be, I guess, soon migrating some play services to ZIO, which is now a bit easier since they have finally a version that supports Scala 3, and our shared stuff for ZIO is already like in Scala 3, so it was a bit harder to go from Scala 2 to ZIO and Scala 3 in one step. I think that was a bit too big, but now I guess soon ZIO everywhere. Goodbye play. It was a nice time, you know. It was much nicer than what I used before at the time, but I think ZIO HTTP is a good replacement for that.
Well, that's awesome, and it's always good when you can like use the stuff you're working on like at your actual like work, because it just has different like volume and requirements and stuff, and like you see what works and what doesn't, and you feed that back in. And sometimes you don't realize that if you're just doing your own thing.
Absolutely, and that's also like what I definitely did, right? I gave a lot of feedback to John also in the early stages of the ZIO HTTP, and I remember he was like contributing different features based on my feedback and me trying the stuff out, and that was also nice to have like the close contact with the Spartan program. So
awesome. So I mean, I think we'll definitely get into more stuff about just open source as we go, but I think kind of the like feature at least we wanted to talk to everyone about was this open API generation. So maybe I'll hand it over to you to talk about what you've done.
So let me just prepare my little thing in my IDE.
Yeah, definitely. And meanwhile, I'll grab the Discord link for everyone. And as we go, everyone, if you have any questions, type them into the Discord that I'll send you, and I'll try to kind of man the Discord and take any questions that people ask and kind of feed them as we're going through here. So let me just get that.
Actually, I'm not sure. Should I start with the OpenAPI stuff immediately, or maybe it's better I talk like 5 sentences about the endpoint API because it's the base feature, right?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know that yet, either because you don't know ZIO HTTP, or maybe you just use the classical way, or use some older version of ZIO HTTP, which I guess there's quite a few outside that are still using like older versions. Some 1 versions, some 2 release candidates, some release candidates of the current 3 version, or I think there's also 005 or something like that. There's a lot of versions, and I'm actually not sure if there was ever like something that was really like a release version without an RC. I'm actually not sure right now. But there was a lot of interesting stuff happening. Nevertheless, the nicest thing about like the 3 versions, I would say, is this endpoint API. Which from the basics and principles you might know, since there's another Scala library that does similar stuff, that is Tapir, right? So the basic idea is that you describe on a high level how an endpoint should look like, right? So you can see this also in this endpoint class. When you take a look at what's actually inside, there's like a root pattern, right? So this is this new way to define roots that is also in the non-endpoint API, but it's basically just saying, is it get, post, whatever, and some root with some literal path segments and some variable path segments. And then you have these HTTP codecs that are just, what's the input of this endpoint? What's the output? What are the errors? This is not only like the body or something like this, but this means there's a definition like what HTTP header do we require, which query parameters do we require, which body do we require? How does this stuff look like? And this is backed up by a lot of code in ZIO HTTP, but also by another ZIO library called ZIO Schema that just describes how does a data structure look like, right? And we save all this information when creating this endpoint instance, and then we are able to analyze what's inside there, right? We can introspect the type and the fields and also meta information, like what you see here. For example, here's some documentation for the whole endpoint, but each input and each atom in the inputs can also have documentation and examples and all the stuff that you would usually find when you have some open API, right? Like this is usually what you find. So yeah, and based on that, what I implemented is something that takes this endpoint instance, and you know, we have already from before like take the endpoint and run a server, and we had take the endpoint and run a client, make a request, right? And now the third thing we have, we can use the endpoint for to run some code is generate OpenAPI. And yeah, this is powered by this nice small OpenAPI class that doesn't have a lot of lines. No, yeah. So yeah, OpenAPI is quite complex, and there's a lot of stuff. And that's not the only thing. On top of that, there's also some big JSON schema class that is like new on this branch at my current pull request. So this is maybe also important to note here. This is currently not in the latest RC. Sadly, I think the Zyverge guys were a bit busy and nobody had time to review my stuff, but that's okay. You know, there will be for sure another RC or release or whatever. And
it's definitely coming.
Yes, of course. And don't worry. So I think I did already some good testing, and probably it's not so far from what is usable, as we will hopefully also see today. And yeah, but so these two types, right? They are just the structure that describes OpenAPI in general. This has yet nothing to do with like the endpoint API or how we generate the code. This could also be used if you have just the ordinary API definitions, like what you do, right? Just like write some roots constructor call and then put in your root definitions and stuff like this. You could also then say, okay, you know what, for this stuff I want to write some open API, but then you have to go, right? You have here the base object, and then you have to fill in the open API version and this info object and some components and passes and whatever is in your open API. And this is, of course, a lot of work to do this manually. And if you use the endpoint API, you basically get this for free, because then there is this generator class that is also some code, but not as much, I guess, as the other two. But yeah, where do we have this? I think, what was it called? From endpoints, you have these little methods where you can see you give in some endpoints without any meta information, or just like a title and a version. That's, I guess, the two base constructors we have right now. And then you get out some OpenAPI object, and the OpenAPI object can then be written out currently only as JSON, but I guess we could also add afterwards like YAML if you prefer that. I guess there's no real difference, because usually nobody reads these files from OpenAPI with the eyes, right? Usually you use some JavaScript renderer that shows you the stuff in the browser. And yeah, but for now it's JSON, and also the model is not only able to print JSON but also to read JSON. Yeah, so you could also take some file and read in the OpenAPI. This works already, but has no real usage yet. But that's like the next feature on my list, so that you can not only have the endpoint API and generate OpenAPI, but that you can also have OpenAPI and generate the endpoints if you like to go open API definitions first, right? I know some teams and some companies like that, and I think that's totally fine. And I guess there's no real objective way to say like this is better or that. I think this is just preference, like at least in my opinion. If you have some other opinion, feel free. but
No,
yeah.
I think different organizations. Yeah, there's code
Yeah,
preference, but it's good to
yes.
support both of them.
I think both is fine, and also at the end, if you write like code first, right, and you have like a language like Scala where you have like all these very nice ways to model data structures, and then you also put like these endpoints in place, right? You can even argue, is this not actually spec first? You know, it's even if it's code, right? But yeah. Anyhow, maybe we just take a look at the tests I wrote to see how this works, right? So
yeah, the tests are always good examples.
yeah, that's always the case, especially in this stage of ZIO HTTP. I think where there's not so much documentation for all the stuff yet. I think there's a lot of you that are looking at the tests or at the example files that are in the repo and to try to figure out how stuff is working. But I think also we did a great job recently with a lot of improvements that a lot of the stuff gets more and more user friendly and easier to understand. And yeah, but this is also something that I really like to improve here and there. I know there's some stuff that is not yet how can I say, so user friendly as you might expect it from an HTTP library. And there is some improvements, but I think we are right now at a stage that is very good, like for the basics, right? Like the underlying stuff, I think, is in a very good state, and I don't expect there's big changes coming anymore. You remember, Adam, we had also some discussion about heavily changing APIs during the RC versions. I think this time is over now, and
Yes.
that the stuff under the hood will not change a lot, but there might be some API changes for the user to make things easier and friendlier for you, right? Because this is we don't only want like something that is performance and has the benefits of a descriptive API and stuff like this, but it should also be usable and readable, right? Like this is also but let's take a look at the tests and the examples here. So let's maybe start with the easiest one here, and I zoom a bit so we can be sure that you can read the stuff. I hope that's okay now.
Yeah.
Size-wise. Yeah, so let's start here with this. It's a simple endpoint, right? So this is an endpoint that is defined by this little get root here, just some random static, and we say we want to get a path parameter that is a integer with the name ID, and a path parameter of type UUID with the name UUID. You know, not a real API, but totally enough for our use case. And we want to add some documentation. This we do with this double question mark operator, and we have some documentation type that I can here create a paragraph with this p operator. But actually, there's also like a nice new feature that I can maybe also show. I hope this is now working here. Yeah, so we have this little MD string interpolator that lets you define like a string that is markdown, and I configured this myself that this markdown syntax highlighting is actually working. But on the Scala days, I worked with somebody from IntelliJ together, and I don't know if it's released yet. It might be still a few weeks out until it's released. But this is basically then like a base setting in the Scala plugin, and whenever you will write like this MD string interpolator, you get like syntax highlighting for the markdown in the string. So that might help to write some documentation in a nice way. But beware. This is not like parsed in a fancy way or something like this, but just saved as a string. And the documentation actually has like other ways to be printed out than only Markdown, but also HTML and something for the console if you want to generate like a CLI client from the endpoints API, which by the way also works. This is another thing that works. I forgot to mention that earlier. So we have like server client in code that you can generate now, the OpenAPI stuff, but also like a CLI interface that you can generate for your calls. Yeah, but so this will only work, this MD operator, if you generate only OpenAPI. If you would use it for the CLI, it will basically blow because we don't know how to translate this into some output that is nice for the console. Yeah, but besides that, you can also just stick to this syntax as I had it before, right? And this works for all the stuff, HTML, Markdown, and console output. Yeah, so this adds like some documentation to this UUID thing, right? And we say like, hey, that's the user ID, nice. And then followed by another string that is a name, and we give the whole thing also some documentation, which is just get path. As I said, just a very stupid example, just to prove that the stuff is working, right? And then we define like some inputs and outputs. So we have for the input here the simple input body that also gets some documentation, simple output body, also some documentation, and an error not found, for which we say if this is the error that we return, right, then this is the corresponding HTTP status and also some documentation. You could take a look at the input and output classes above here, as this is also something you should find in the OpenAPI documentation. I guess we should do that now, right? So this is just the simple output body is some username and a score, whatever that is for, and the simple input body is a name and an age. It's not so important, like if this is like, as I said, it's not a real domain or something like this. It's just nice to notice, right? These are the fields, and do we find this again at the end in the OpenAPI spec that we generate. Yeah, and then we can take maybe a look here at the first test that is using this the simple endpoint, right? And you can see the call here is very easy. I just hand over the endpoint and say, give it like a title and a version of this API. This is like the minimum meta information that is necessary that we cannot get out of the endpoint API, that is necessary to build some meaningful OpenAPI thing. The OpenAPI version that we generate here is by default 3.1, so the latest one. I currently don't have any plans to extend this to some earlier versions, because I don't know if this is necessary, if anybody needs to generate like a certain version in the environment. I don't know. If you need to do that, give some feedback, open an issue, right? Then we can talk about this. But I assume that most of you only use like older versions of OpenAPI because that's what your library is using or something like this that generates this for you. I don't expect that anybody needs to use an old OpenAPI spec. I mean, I don't know if you have different experience, Adam, but it's at least like what what I usually know.
No, that makes sense
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. So and it's of course much easier to just support like the latest versions than 2 and 3.0 and 3.1 and you know. And yeah, in the test you just see here we take this generated thing and I generate out of this here not directly a JSON string, but an AST because that's a little easier for the test comparison since the I can now write here some string, right? And compare like the AST that I get out of that string and the AST that I get out of the JSON from the OpenAPI. And then it doesn't matter if I have here like a line break on the wrong place or something like that, and it is a bit different than what I would generate from the JSON for the OpenAPI. Yeah, but as this test is green, I could run this now, but I don't think that's very useful. But you can see that this is basically like the JSON that is coming out, right? And yeah, that's I guess the main thing. So you see here we generate some paths, and we say like that's the path. There's a get on this path. We have some parameters, and here we have like the in parameter, the ID parameter here from the path. And you can also see the type of that is like an integer, and yeah, there's the UUID. By the way, also we can see here the documentation for the UUID that is generated. Yeah, there is these line breaks. I'm not sure if maybe we need to still do some optimizations on this doc type and how it generates stuff because one could ask himself like why do they need to be two new lines here, but that's how it is right now, and that was not my focus for the ticket, right? I wanted to generate some OpenAPI stuff.
There's enough here.
And yeah, and I think if that's the price you pay for automated OpenAPI generation, that the documentation ends with a double new line, I think you can live with that. but yeah, there might be some potential for optimizing. Yeah, and I don't know, I could now go through all of this, but I think the most important part is that thanks to the introspection of all the data types, right? You can see here we generate everything. By default, what we do is if we have like a request body and generate a schema for it, we will not have like inline schemas, but we put these under the component schemas in the OpenAPI model, which is, I think, the same behavior as the default what Spring is doing. I try to stick to that because it seems to work for a lot of people. So why not for the HTTP too, right? And but you can change actually the style. There is like in the generator method here, you find there's some overloaded versions, and one of them has somewhere here this JSON schema style. Where you basically have three options. You can either say it should be inlined, so then you would not find this reference here, but so the whole schema directly here in this place. Or you have this like this format here, the default, which I called compact. So it means out of the class name, we just generate like the identifier for the schema, and then there is like a more verbose one for avoiding naming clashes that not only takes the class name but prefixes it with the package path. So if you have like two objects that are having the same name but coming from a different package, right? And you both need to put this in your schema, then use this style, and you will not have naming clashes. I mean, I don't think this should be possible, right? You cannot have like the same package structure and name in a JVM, and yeah, that would blow up, I guess. So I hope this is unique enough in this place. And yeah, so we see here now, this is the request body, right? There's the response. Here the 200 is the default status code. If we take a little look up here again, oops, here's the in, right? I didn't hand any sorry, here's the out. I didn't hand over any specific status code, so the default is HTTP 200, which is, I guess, reasonable, right? This is most likely the thing that you want to return for something that was a success. And yeah, and here's like the 404 not found with the other schema. And in the components, you then find the different schemas. So for example, let's take here this the simple input body, and you just find what you would expect, right? This is like an object, and it has a name property that is a string, and an age property that is an integer. And since it's an int and not a long, it's an int 32, not 64. So besides that, you can also see we have here like this list of required stuff, and the required stuff is basically also like taking a look at your types. If you have like an option, it would not be in the required list, and if you have something that's not an option, then it would be in the required list, because right, we have like a static type language, and we need these fields, right? We are not like some dynamic thing that can omit fields as it wants. But so yeah, but this is the base rule is like, if it's optional, it wouldn't be here. If it's not, then it's in the required list. I guess also nothing that if you know OpenAPI and you know Scala would surprise you. And yeah, I could go now to some other examples without showing you the endpoint, just to show you that it works, right? So if I have like a query parameter, this works as well. So then the parameter has the in type query and not pass. And maybe if we scroll down to the next one, which is maybe more interesting. So here we have some endpoint definition where actually we have an alternative, right? So I said my input body could be this other simple input body, or it can be simple input body. And even these structures will be generated in some valid OpenAPI spec. So here you can see that for this case, the request body, we say, okay, we expect a content application JSON, and this can be one of these schemas. It can be either other simple input body or simple input body. And another thing that you might be interested in is, yeah, here we have the same thing for the outputs. It's not so big of a difference. It's just worth a test. This one also nice with like examples, right? So when you want to give examples to the endpoint definition in your HTTP codec, you say just the same like before, like sorry, not the same like before. Here we have a little bit more complex. So you see there is this there's actually this in method that is like a little bit simpler, but there is also in codec, which hands over not some simple information, but this a little bit more complex HTTP codec with some restrictions what the codec can be. But here in this case, so it's a codec where the content is the simple input body, and I add here some examples, and examples is like yeah, basically tuples, where it's like a name for the example and then the actual value. And you can see here also we don't need to take some string or something, right? But we are staying in this type safe, statically typed API, right? Where when we say I have a content of simple input body, then I also give you an example of simple input body, and the machinery will take care of generating like a JSON output out of this. So we can take a look at this down here, right? So here we say there's again the schema with a reference to the components, and then I have an example here, John, whose name is John and age is 42. So no need to do anything here manually. This is all taken care of. But of course, you can see this up here. We have these schemas that like help to power all of this. But don't worry, as every good Scala library, we have generators. You don't need to write schemas by hand. Yeah. And I think one more example, and then we maybe can take a look at the chat, and if there's some questions or ideas whatsoever.
Yeah, we definitely got some questions.
And that is also important. Multipart. Multipart is also supported. So if we have like an endpoint definition with that basically represents multipart. So multipart in the endpoint API you do by calling in or out codec, and then create a combined codec with the plus plus operator. And whenever you see this, right, like multiple codecs combined with plus plus, doesn't matter, in or out codecs, this will lead to a multipart. We have here some example for that. And then if you take a look, this was now the out codec. So if we take a look here at responses, you also see here content, multipart form data, and also the schema for that with all the fields we have above there. I don't think it's very beneficial to go now here into details, but I think it's good to know that this works. And there's also here one example where I take multiple endpoints, and they are then combined like to one OpenAPI spec. So right, because you have probably more than one endpoint, and there's just like this function for generating OpenAPI from endpoints that has just like here a var arc for the endpoints, and you can just hand over as many as you want. What I must say here is, if you would have their conflicting things that would override each other in a way that you might not want to, there's currently nothing that checks this for you, right? So this is very, very simple under the hood. If you would hand over here to endpoints that are both gets for the same path, the second one would override the first one. Yeah, so this is very, very simple from the logic. I think this is maybe something one could think about for future improvements, to just throw some exception or something like this if you do that, right? And say like, hey, probably not what you want. But I as I said, like this is like a first version. It should fulfill the basic requirements, right? And I hope to get like a lot of feedback from you guys. And that said, I think maybe we No, one thing before we go to the chat, because this is
Yeah,
also
yeah.
another question that comes up. Now that I have this open API object, right? And here, if you take a look, I can just call here uh, to JSON or to JSON pretty, whatever you prefer. Now this is just like a string, right? How do I render this? Because I might want to offer like write some endpoint that somebody can call and see the stuff in a nice web interface. I know there's also other people who might just offer like an endpoint for the JSON thing, and I guess how this would work you can find out yourself. That shouldn't be that hard. So the Open API, by the way, also has a schema, so you could also have endpoints, generate Open APIs for that, and then have an endpoint that returns the Open API schema, and you don't even need to convert it to a string. You can just send over the Open API, and it will, give back like some JSON automatically. But a puzzle piece that will come later, that will be like another PR, is that we want to offer you a middleware where you can basically then hand over like an Open API object and define like a path, right? And then we would add under this path to your roots the Open API definition, and you can just use this, and we will show the most common Open API renderer, so the Swagger UI that then will show you this in a nice way. But this is a future feature. This is not there yet, and but I would expect before the next RC or the release. I don't know which one will happen next. I think nobody knows yet for sure.
Yeah.
I guess this feature will be there already. So this is probably only not there if you would try some of the snapshot builds before the next release. I know some of you do that. That's why I mentioned this. But for now, this is not even a snapshot build, right? Still open pull request. But please also, it's always nice, give some feedback. Give some feedback to pull requests, but maybe also check from time to time the issues. Recently, I even went proactively for some topics where I opened issues and I knew, oh, this guy, he was asking
We
about
actually
this
did
on
it.
Discord, and how do you like this? And is this something that would help you, right? And I must also say a big thanks. There were a lot of guys that give some nice feedback, and I guess now we can check what chat has to say.
Yeah. Well, I think there were a lot of questions and comments, which is great because I think this is something that's like really practical and I think people can see kind of using in their day-to-day work.
Yes.
So I think the first one that I think you just kind of answered is any plans on having live documentation, Swagger UI / redoc. So I think the basic answer is like, yes, there are plans. No, it is not here yet.
Yes, and I think for the first I will be adding Swagger because I think this is probably the one that is the most commonly used, and at least then you have one way, right? And if there's the need for other ways, or you're interested in something else than Swagger, please open an issue and I will take a look at that. But we will provide you for sure with some nice interface and some help. And I guess also these things, this UI or that UI, that's probably just a few lines of code to provide this for you. As long as it's possible, I would say to do this in a way that is definitely possible with Swagger, that we just reference some JavaScript files somewhere in some content delivery network and then can call the methods, right? Because I think what you will try to avoid is to add any dependencies to ZIO HTTP for this Open API rendering stuff, right? So like having like a loose dependency, just like some string somewhere, I think that's okay. But I don't think we want to add like other libraries to ZIO HTTP for these features. At least not to the core. If you have some idea where this would be necessary, this would probably be some extra module and not in the core ZIO HTTP library.
We've got, I guess, more of a comment. Someone was saying that round tripping the generated OpenAPI specifications through the generated parser would be a good way of testing things. Which, yeah, that definitely can. I don't know if you've done that particular thing yet, but that could be a fun thing to do. Sometimes you have issues maybe of like, oh, the spacing is slightly different. But
yeah. And I'm also actually not sure. So one thing here is I don't think that this is something that okay, so that is a good goal to have this at least in the way that when we read the stuff and write it out, that the content should be the same. It should be the same JSON. I'm not sure that this should be a goal, and I can explain to you why. There is, for a lot of stuff, different ways to encode the same meaning in the OpenAPI spec, right? And to ensure that what we read is the same what we generate would mean we also would need to have very specific details of how it was encoded, right? But I think much easier here is that when we generate the endpoints from OpenAPI, we might have different OpenAPI structures that lead to the same structure in the endpoint. And also, even if we have maybe some slightly different endpoint definitions, they might still lead to the same OpenAPI structure. And therefore, what I guess should be the focus here is that the meaning is the same, not that the structure of the JSON and the JSON is the same. And you must also remember, like, where does this OpenAPI come from, right? This is not like a documentation style that is very functional and has like a Scala background where you know what kind of data can you encode in which way, and therefore there is some weird stuff going on and some things where you also sometimes ask yourself, why do you need another way to encode the basically the same structure if you would take a look from a higher level, which, by the way, some of you might have noticed it took a while to implement this feature. And this is basically because of some ambiguity in OpenAPI, but also first I tried to use the Java library to read the OpenAPI, and if you ever come to the idea, hey, I could use the Java API to read the OpenAPI and then do something with it in a Scala way, don't. Just don't. And yeah, but I think this way now is much better. We have like the Scala structure that is basically just relying on ZIO ZIO JSON, or no, not ZIO JSON, ZIO schema, and the JSON encoders and decoders that come from the ZIO JSON, ZIO HTTP, too many ZIO libraries. ZIO schema, JSON codec thing that is flying around there, which is under the hood actually ZIO JSON, but because this is like the schema based one, and we have the schemas, right? We can then also take the ZIO schema or could take a ZIO schema YAML codec and generate YAML instead of JSON from this, and that's I guess nice. Yeah, but it's schema based for now, and then we have this structure, right? This is very Scala like, and from there we will then be able to hopefully also generate the endpoints, and I think actually this is probably already like 30% or something done, because as I said, I have this OpenAPI structure that can not only write but also read, and then going from there to some open API stuff to some endpoint definitions, I guess, is not that hard anymore. My basic idea will be here that I will from the open API definition generate some Scala classes that basically model Scala classes and then makes this printable and generate files out of this. And hopefully this will not only power the open API stuff, but there are also other things on the list, like generating from protobuf. And I don't know, maybe you could add curl or postman collections, or I don't know, right? But they will all need to do the same thing. They will need to describe first the open API, the endpoint API, and how to construct this, like in a Scala way, right? How should the Scala class look like? How should the Scala code look like? And then print this. And I hope I will build there something that will be reusable for all of these things.
Nice. Let's see what else. We have someone who was saying, don't worry about the new lines, which definitely I agree with. Someone was asking, can we provide examples as part of the open API? And I think we saw that you can do that, which is awesome.
Yes.
So we got one question about, can you use ZIO JSON configurations like the snake case versus non-snake case, or things like that to customize how this JSON gets generated? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I am actually not 100% sure about this. I didn't try this out, but I would expect that you can at least do this for your custom classes, right? So if we take a look again here, we have here the simple input body, and I think if you would put some annotations here on this input body, I think so as I said, I don't use ZIO JSON directly, but I use ZIO Schema, which then under the hood uses ZIO JSON. But I actually think this ZIO Schema JSON codec supports both the ZIO JSON and also the ZIO Schema annotations for writing out stuff. Yeah, but I think it will only work for this types. It will not work out for the open API itself, but I think it's also probably not a good idea, because open API is very specific how the fields should look like and what the names should be, right? But if you're talking about like your classes and how the schemas for your class look like, I guess that should be possible to configure this. As I said, I didn't try this out. Maybe I will. Maybe you like to try this out. I don't know. But even if this would not work, I guess we can make this work. That shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, cool. There was one question of like saying that the CLI client generation looks cool, and can we see something about that? I think maybe that's good for us to do at another Symposium, and maybe we can get the person who worked on that to come and talk to us about that. But that is is super cool. Then we had a question of, is there a published artifact you can play with for this? And I think the answer for that is not yet. So we publish snapshots on every merge to the main branch. So this right now is a PR. Clearly, we're very excited about it. It will definitely get merged, but it's just got to kind of get reviewed and go through that process. So once it's through that, then we'll have a snapshot that everyone can play with. But think about this as like a preview of what you can play with soon right now.
Yes. I mean, you can, of course, if you are really keen, right? You can go and check out my branch and build it locally and try it out if you want. This is always a possibility. It's the code is there, right? Nobody can stop you. But if you have some patience or don't like to build this yourself, then you have to wait until at least the snapshot build is there after it's merged. But of course, you know, if you are really interested about this, one of the people who could maybe review this is the other face you see here right now.
That's true. That's true.
Maybe if you poke Adam, he likes to review.
Very fair. Very fair. Then we got a couple of questions here that I think maybe are just a little more like ZIO HTTP. There's a question of, is input validation handled on the schema level? And I think the basic answer is kind of yes, and of like, yeah, when you have a schema, what you can part of what you can use as description of a data structure is you can kind of take an input and you can try to decode it into that, and that may succeed or fail. So that's at one level. And then you can also add additional validations on top of it. If you say, well, you know, I want to decode it with the schema, but then I also want to validate it with some extra conditions, you can add all those logic onto that. But yeah, you can do that as part of the schema.
Yeah. But there's also one thing in ZIO HTTP, right? Sorry, in OpenAPI, where you can define some rules that should be validated, like for strings or something like this, some regex. This stuff is not supported yet, so we wouldn't even read this in currently, right? So if you have like some API definition that has like some regex for validation, and we would read it in, we would just drop it currently. And also the other way around, there's no way to define in your API endpoint definition something like the string should match this pattern, and then that this pattern is also put into the OpenAPI spec. This is currently not working. Also, there's you can basically say the strings have some different formats, not only regex, but like it should be a UUID, I think, or email addresses or something like this. There's also no support for this yet. This is like, as I said, I tried to stick to the basics and the fundamentals, right? And we can build on this on top. There is for sure a lot of stuff that still can be done.
Yeah.
But I would argue, you know, you can still go and write in your documentation like the string needs to have follow the regex whatever, right? So you can still communicate this, but maybe not in this open API kind of way, the built-in mechanism. But if you need this, if you think this is something useful, I personally, for example, never used it. I didn't even know that it existed before I built this feature. Yeah, but if you think that would add value to the HTTP, as I said many times before, please open an issue, right? And then we can work on that. And by the way, when I say we, I don't only mean like the few maintainers, right? Like Adam, John, Daniel, and me, or something like this. But everybody of you, right? Like feel always free to write some code for open source libraries. That's good for your resume, good for learning stuff. And if you need help, I'm, you know, available in Discord. Either you can find me in the Zyverge or the ZIO Discord, and you can also ping me and say like, hey, I have some idea, can you help me? Or I'm also totally happy to pair program if somebody wants that. That's totally fine.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So Adrian has a question. What's the relation between this and Swagger, or do you see them as complementary in some way?
Yeah, so I'm actually not 100% sure, but if I'm correct, the history of Swagger and OpenAPI is that it was basically some people that came up with the Swagger thing, right? And they had like the JSON definition, and they also had the rendering. And then at some point they said, hey, we want to standardize this. And then out of that was born the OpenAPI definition. And this is now, I think, a part of the Linux Foundation or something like that. And now it's like more like an open spec, and Swagger is, and the Swagger UI, right, is like one tool that can render the OpenAPI stuff, but there are also other tools. So the relation here would be that the Swagger UI is like a renderer for the OpenAPI spec, and as I said, will also probably be the first way to render this in ZIO HTTP, and we will give you some nice constructor to yeah to build this. I'm actually not even 100% sure if it will be a middleware or just something that some constructor that you would put in your list of roots in the roots objects, something like this. It will be easy to use. I will make sure of that.
Yeah, and I think Russ was saying much the same thing. He was saying I think Swagger is a front end for rendering OpenAPI. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you take a look, like the older definitions of OpenAPI, right, you will always see like it's called Swagger OpenAPI, and
yeah.
you can go to the Swagger homepage, you find the definitions. You can go to the OpenAPI homepage and you find the definitions. And I think starting with version 2 something, it was then OpenAPI, and before it was just Swagger.
Totally. Okay, I think we have one more question that's like, I think maybe a little more just ZIO HTTP in general, but are security schemes supported, especially in a way that can be tied to authentication middleware?
I think this is something that is a bit so. So the problem here is not that that it doesn't exist in the data structure, right? But there is a problem with how the authentication is defined in the middleware. So right now we have only maybe I can even show this. So we have this authentication something. This is wait. Headers, header codex here, and there is authorization, right? And here this authorization data structure, it has these different classes here, yes, you can see, right? Like basic, digest, barrier, and some unparsed. And at runtime, when you see these things, you know what's happening. But the problem is, when you define like a middleware, you don't say I expect barrier or I expect digest or I expect basic, but you just say I expect authorization. So it's currently not introspectable which kind of authentication you want to use. I already talked about this with John, but since this needs some fix outside of the OpenAPI generation first, and I was very into the OpenAPI generation, I didn't touch that, and John was also busy with other stuff, so nobody took care of that yet. But there probably needs to be some change here, where we can have a structure that is introspectable, right? That tells us what kind of authorization do you actually expect, because only then we can generate the authorization schemas for OpenAPI. But once this is done, so once what the first step is over, right? This information can be introspected, then the next step would be to do this in the generator, and I think that is then also not that hard anymore. And yeah, it's on the list. And the list is long, but yeah, as I said before, feel free to contribute.
Yeah. So I think that's all the questions we've got right now, and I mean we're I think basically at time that we can almost run over a little bit, but yeah, I think maybe the only other thing is I know you wanted to share some of your thoughts on open source, and I think you've done that a little
Yeah.
bit, just encouraging everyone else to get involved, which I would really echo. But yeah, maybe any other thoughts that you'd like to share on that?
Yes, yes. So one thing that I'd like to share with you is I said mentioned before, right? Why it took long is because I started over with this feature multiple times and threw away what I had before because I just realized the way it didn't work out, and also if you ever, I mean, I can show you this. OpenAPI spec, if you take a look at that one. So you see also here is like the Swagger IO, right? And they have the spec, and here is
Completely
the
separate.
Open API initiative, and they have the spec. Uh, I think this one is rendered a bit better. But besides that, right? So you can see the spec, you know, and that's not even all, because somewhere here it says like, yeah, and the schemas, they are actually JSON schemas with some extension, right? So you also get a link to JSON schema
Spec.
and the specs there, and yeah, and if you never touched either of them before, yeah, that's quite a bit to learn. But besides that, I wanted to show you also, you know, um, this feature and the fact that it's powered by ZIO Schema uh, meant also that I didn't have to only implement this feature, but I had also to implement features in ZIO Schema. So if we take a look at pull requests and the ones that are merged, and where the author is me, right? And then you see that over the time there were multiple pull requests from me that were merged into ZIO Schema, and I think with one exception that was not necessary but made stuff in the OpenAPI stuff a bit more beautiful. Like everything here is basically OpenAPI related, and some of it were fixes, some of it were new features, but without these, the OpenAPI generation would have not worked. So what I want to tell you is, if you ever think, hey, I really need this feature in this open source library, right? And you think like, boy, why does it take so long? Can they not do a bit faster? You know, this is sometimes the reason for that. And please also remember that yeah, I guess you can say some of the average guys they get paid for the open source contribution, but for most people that's not true. They are maybe allowed to do open source contributions during working hours, but they're not like actively paid for it, right? And also the average people, you might have heard of this platform that is called Golem, which took a lot of time and effort, right? And by the way, also a very cool product. And yeah, so you also have to understand, right? If I open a pull request here, um, you know, now that I sometimes talk with Adam or with Daniel, I might get some stuff merged faster than other people, also because I'm willing to reach out, right? This is, I guess, also sometimes the case. You have so many GitHub notifications and you just don't see that there's a new pull request, right? So also, if you think like, oh, my pull request, nobody took a look for a long time, sometimes it helps to reach out, maybe also with on Discord, to let people know that there is something, right? Maybe they just missed it. But the round trip for this, right? So I take this feature of implementing OpenAPI. I do some stuff. Then I realize, oh, I need something in ZIO Schema that doesn't exist. So I go and I open a pull request. Somebody has to review the pull request. Then maybe you don't always want to work on snapshots, and maybe it's something that you want to release. Then ZIO Schema needs to release, so we can release ZIO HTTP, right? And so there is a lot of things that are in a long chain, right? And then just because one thing is merged and fixed, as you see, there's many pull requests, then maybe I work for some time, right? And I also don't have always time to work on this stuff, but then I have worked like I have to wait, then I can work, then I do work, then I realize there's something else missing in ZIO schema, and I fix it again, and then again I have to wait for some pull request reviews. So if you ever ask yourself, why does it take long to get some features done in your open source library? Yeah, that's the reason, and since we are not like working all in a big happy company and see each other every day, it takes a lot of communication effort and overhead to get the stuff done. And also there's like, yeah, some prioritization needs to happen, right? Like you cannot do all at the same time. And yeah, there are sometimes, some people who fix some stuff that is like very important to them. But I would say there's probably just like a handful of people who do like continuously work on ZIO HTTP and also ZIO schema. Not the same handful of people, but uh, if you think, hey, can we not speed up open source library development, then it's up to you. If you contribute, then we can. If you give some feedback, right? So contribution not only means writing code, it also means like giving feedback in Discord or by opening an issue. And yeah, but especially with opening issues, there are a lot of people who open issues, and but there's definitely not so much people contributing like actively code, which doesn't mean it's bad to open issues. But if you realize I love a library, but I also open a lot of issues, maybe you can also talk to your boss and say like, hey, I'm using this library and they're very cool, can I not have, doesn't need to be much, 2 hours a week or every 2 weeks, half a day, something like that, right? And do some contribution. And I'm sure it's not only us who work on the library who would appreciate that, but a lot of people out there. The impact you can have there, right? But with a library that hundreds or maybe thousands of people are using is pretty nice. And for me personally, it feels good. It's nice if somebody comes to you and says like, hey, it's a cool feature, or nice that you talked about this. And I also had like some offline event where I talked about different HTTP libraries in Scala, and we're also talking about ZIO HTTP, and people came up to me later on and say like, hey, you talked about this for a long time, 1.5 hours, but I was so fascinated. And people that came to me and said like, yeah, I couldn't use Scala at work for some time, but now that I see this, I really want to do things, and I didn't use ZIO before, but no, I want to, and that's also a nice experience. And yeah, my LinkedIn blow up and my Discord blow up with invitations and messages. By the way, that's also, of course, to all of you who likes to add me on LinkedIn, feel free. I heard actually people saying like, is it actually okay to add you on LinkedIn? And I'm like, yeah, why I am there, So to not communicate, add me, no problem. And also, yeah, if you have questions to the HTTP, feel free to ask on Discord. And as I mentioned before, not only questions in the way of how can I do that, but if you have questions like how can I contribute, also ask, and I'm also happy to help you. And probably not only me, I guess also the others will support you if you ask for support, right? And saying that, if you are interested in that, and I'm sure Adam would be open to that. I didn't talk about this with him before, but I thought there were some questions also regarding migrating to the latest RC from different versions, and since the API is also, I guess, more stable than before, maybe it makes sense to have maybe a Symposium session like we did before, like QA, right? But not all ZIO, but maybe more specific ZIO HTTP, and also let people know so they might come and ask some questions. I think that's maybe
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah, and focus on some of the questions we've gotten on the
Yes.
Discord as people are migrating. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really fantastic place to leave it off. And I mean, I think those were some really great thoughts that you shared. So yeah, I want to thank you for all of your work on this particular feature and just ZOHP in general, and being an awesome member of the ZIO community. It's always kind of just fun to see you around and talk to you on Discord and read what you're writing.
Yeah.
And thanks particularly for joining today and sharing this. And
Yeah,
thanks to
sure.
everyone
Uh,
who's joining.
but by the way, I see there's one more questions somebody
Oh yeah,
asked for if there
yeah,
are
yeah.
any plans for async API. Um, yeah, plans not yet, but as I mentioned before, if you are in need of some feature, open an issue. And yeah, I see that async API is like growing recently, so probably it's possible to get some support for that. Yeah, so and I hope I will be in London for functional Scala. So if somebody want to
Yeah,
see me in person, uh, I hope I will meet you there too, Adam.
yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah,
Then maybe we see each other there.
yeah. We can have a little ZO HTTP session. All right, awesome. Well, have a great weekend, everyone. And since we won't have a symposium before then, happy Halloween to everyone if you're in a part of the
Yeah,
world where that's something to celebrate. But have a great day.
yeah. Bye, and thanks for having me.
Bye.